There's some crimes that shock because of what happened, and others that haunt us because of what we still don't understand. Because sometimes the most disturbing part of a case isn't the violence itself, it's the contradictions left behind. A confession that later disappears, a suspect who cooperates and then recants, a story that seems complete until it isn't. This is a podcast about real crimes that happen to real people, stories rooted here in Kenya, where families, communities, and entire neighborhoods are left still searching for answers long after the headlines fade. Today's story takes us to Kiambu County, January 2021, where 5 people were killed inside one family compound, and the man accused of their murders will later tell police everything before standing in court and saying none of it was true. So as you listen, remember this. Behind every case are lives that mattered, and behind every investigation is a truth that isn't always easy to reach. I'm your host, Wanja, and this is Crime Dopers. Before we begin, a disclaimer. This episode discusses a real criminal case involving multiple deaths, violence within a family, and the killing of a child. While this podcast does not include graphic descriptions, the themes may still be distressing. Listener discretion is advised, especially for those who may be sensitive to discussions of violence, mental health struggles, or traumatic loss. If now isn't the right time to listen, please take care of yourself and feel free to return when you're ready. Now let us begin from the beginning. According to investigators, the shift from thought to action didn't happen at once. In the final months of 2020, police say Lawrence Warunge's private resentments began turning into something more deliberate. In his statements to detectives, Warunge claimed he was actively thinking about committing murder, researching violence online, and becoming increasingly fixated on fictional portrayals of assassins. He told investigators that these stories didn't feel like entertainment to him. They felt instructional. Detectives documented these claims not as explanations but as insight into his mindset at the time. As the weeks passed, police believed his behavior became more intentional, not loud, not chaotic, but quiet and incremental. Decisions that seemed ordinary in isolation but disturbing in hindsight. Warunge began acquiring items he believed would make his plan final. One of the items was obtained through his girlfriend, who prosecutors argue was unaware of its intended purpose. To police, this suggested concealment, an effort to distance himself from scrutiny by keeping his actions embedded in everyday life. Also, Warunge began changing his movements. Roughly 2 weeks before the killings, he and his girlfriend rented a room in Maimahiu, Nakuru County. It is believed that this location served as a space away from family oversight and later became relevant to the disposal of evidence. But his planning didn't stop with preparation. Warunge was also thinking about what will happen after, how the night will be remembered, and who might unknowingly account for his whereabouts. He attempted to influence the condition of people around him. He encouraged his girlfriend to drink alcohol and smoke marijuana, behavior that was later interpreted as an effort to reduce awareness and blur memory. This wasn't about celebration or impulse, it was about uncertainty, because an alibi doesn't always come from someone who can say exactly where you are. Sometimes it comes from someone who can't say for sure. Warunge paid attention to timing, when he was seen, when he left, and how ordinary his absences appeared. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would immediately trigger concern. Whether these actions were calculated strategy or fragmented thinking influenced by substance use, it would later become a point of contention in court. What mattered is that there was a pattern. Preparation layered on top of preparation. Secrecy built into normalcy. Intent hidden behind routine. By the time January arrived, police believed the most critical decisions had already been made, quietly, deliberately, and without warning. So, when January 5th finally came, it was the beginning of a story. It was the end of a planning. Let's look into the Warunge family. See, the Warunge family lived on a private residential compound in Karura village, Kiambu, an area on the outskirts of Nairobi known for family homes and small agricultural plots. The household reflected a common Kenyan extended family structure, combining nuclear family members, visiting relatives, and a resident farm worker. On the night of January 5th, 2021, 5 members of this household were killed. 2 daughters of the family survived, only because they had returned to boarding school earlier that day. Let us start with Nicholas Njoroge Warunge. Nicholas Njoroge Warunge was a trained nurse who had worked in the United States and invested in business and property in Kenya. His transnational lifestyle reflected a growing pattern among Kenyan professionals who work abroad while supporting families and investments back home. Within the household, Nicholas was responsible for overseeing the family compound and associated activities, including farm operations. There is no public record of criminal behavior or prior police involvement linked to him. Police reports indicate that during the attack, Nicholas attempted to escape by jumping from a balcony, an act investigators later cited as evidence of an attempt to survive and seek help. Anne Wanjiku, the homemaker and family caretaker. Anne Wanjiku was the matriarch of the household. Her daily life revolved around managing the home, caring for the children, and maintaining family routines. Investigators stated that she was attacked inside the house, in an area associated with daily domestic activity. Friends and relatives described her as deeply involved in her children's upbringing and household management. No public evidence suggests she was involved in any conflict outside the family home. Then we have Christian Njenga, 13 years of age, a student. He was the youngest son of Nicholas and Anne. He was a minor, dependent on his parents, and living full-time at the family home. Police reports and court documents consistently describe him as a non-involved victim with no connection to any disputes. His death drew particular public attention due to his age and vulnerability. The Warunge family's 2 daughters were not present at home on the night of the murders. They had returned to boarding school earlier that day, a fact investigators later described as significant in understanding the scope of the attack. For privacy and protection, their identities have largely been withheld from public reporting. Maxwell Njenga. Maxwell Njenga was visiting the Warunge household at the time of the attack. His presence reflects common extended family living arrangements in Kenya, where children often stay with their relatives during school holidays or family visits. Police reports indicate that Maxwell was not a permanent resident of the home and had no role in any family disputes. His death extended the impact of the crime beyond the immediate nuclear family. James Kinyanjui Wamba worked and lived on the Warunge family compound. His responsibilities included farm and compound-related duties. Resident workers often share close proximity with family households, making them part of daily routines while remaining employees. Investigators believe James was among the first victims. A detail police later said suggested an attempt to prevent an alarm being raised. Before January 2021, the Warunge family, or yet known as the Njoroge family, was not publicly known. They were not associated with criminal activity, public disputes, or police attention. Their lives revolved around work, school calendars, family visits, and maintaining a household. What makes this case particularly devastating is not only the number of the victims, but the collapse of an entire family system. Parents, children, extended relatives, and a worker, all affected in a single night. Now, when detectives questioned Lawrence Warunge about his state of mind, one detail kept resurfacing in his statements: a fixation on a television series. Warunge told police that while researching violence online, he became absorbed in Killing Eve, a British television drama centered on the pursuit of professional assassin. Now let's get to understand what Killing Eve is all about, okay? So Killing Eve is a fictional crime series that follows a cat and mouse relationship between two women, Eve Polastri, an intelligence investigator, and Villanelle, a charismatic assassin. The show is known less for procedural realism and more for psychological tension, exploring obsession, identity, control, and moral detachment. Crucially, Killing Eve is not instructional. It does not present violence as achievable or realistic for ordinary people. Its characters operate in an exaggerated world far removed from real life. Investigators documented Warunge's references to the show not to suggest it caused violence, but because he himself described identifying with aspects of the character Villanelle, particularly her emotional distance and perceived control. Mental health professionals are clear on this point. Media does not create violent behavior, but individuals experiencing psychological distress may interpret fiction through a distorted lens. From police interviews and psychiatric evaluations, a picture began to emerge of a young man who felt deeply misunderstood and emotionally isolated. Warunge described himself as unappreciated within his own home, consistently criticized by his parents, treated unfairly compared to his siblings. He used extreme language when describing his parents, referring to them as satanic and claiming they actively worked against him. There is no independent evidence supporting these claims. Investigators and clinicians viewed them as a sign of paranoid thinking, not objective reality. Psychiatric reports later introduced in court referenced a history of substance use and episodes of distorted belief and paranoia, which may have intensified feelings of persecution and grievance. Now, Nicholas Njoroge Warunge and Anne Wanjiku were described by friends and relatives as structured, traditional parents, focused on education, responsibility, and household order. To Lawrence, that structure reportedly felt oppressive. As the eldest son, he occupied an ambiguous space, expected to be independent, yet still subject to parental authority. Investigators believe this tension, combined with his personal struggles, fed a growing sense of resentment. What stands out in the records is not documented abuse of violence within the home, but a perception gap. Parents who believed they were guiding their son, and a son who believed he was being targeted and diminished. The gap widened over time. Now, Warunge did not describe Killing Eve as simple entertainment. He framed it as something he returned to repeatedly, particularly during periods when he felt powerless or unheard. This pattern aligned with escapism rather than influence, a retreat into a fictional world where control is absolute and consequences are abstract. In other words, the fixation did not replace reality, but it may have provided a distorted mirror for emotions that were already present. It's essential to be clear. Millions of people watch crime dramas without committing harm. There is no causal link between consuming fictional media and committing real-world violence. Let's get to the morning of January 5th, 2021. Nothing about the Warunge home suggested what the night would bring. That day unfolded like many others. Two of the children prepared to return to boarding school. Goodbyes were exchanged. Bags were packed. By afternoon, the compound was quieter, reduced to the parents, their sons, a visiting nephew, and the farm worker. According to Lawrence's statement, he told police the absence of his sisters changed the scope of what he believed would happen that night. As evening settled over Karura village, the family followed familiar routines. Dinner, rest, the wind, the slow winding down of a weekday. Investigators say there were no signs of alarm, no raised voices, no calls for help. The household had settled for the night. Then Warunge began moving through the compound. The first person he encountered was James Kinyanjui Wamba, the farm worker who lived on the property. Detectives will later interpret this as an attempt to prevent alarm being raised. After killing James, he moved into the main house. He entered through the kitchen where his mother Wanja was. Now this is a kitchen where his mother stood many times, thousands of times, preparing supper, preparing lunch, preparing breakfast for the family. But this very place is where Lawrence took his own mother's life. Then he proceeded to the younger brother, Christian Jenga. He said Christian pleaded with him, but he still went ahead and murdered him. Now, at some point, Nicholas Njoroge, that's the father, realized something was wrong. Warunge told detectives his father attempted to escape, running towards a balcony and jumping down, injuring himself in the process. Nicholas was pursued outside the house, where the attack continued, and again, Lawrence killed his father. The final victim was 12-year-old Maxwell Jenga, the nephew. He tried to hide, but Warunge found him and attacked him despite his pleas for mercy. By the time it was all over, the house was silent. 5 people were dead. In his statement, Warunge told detectives that what followed was mechanical, almost detached. He said he gathered the items connected to the attack, placed them into a bag, and left the compound. There were no immediate witnesses, no alarms triggered, no emergency calls made. When morning came on January 6th, concern was raised after the household failed to respond as expected. That's when the bodies were discovered and the scale of what had happened became clear. After committing the murders, Warunge traveled out of Kiambu that night, heading towards Kiambu in Nakuru County, a location where he had previously rented a room. Now, this was not a random destination. It was a place that was already familiar to him. For several days, he moved freely. Back in Kiambu, concern began to build. The family had gone silent, phones were unanswered, and their bodies were discovered on January 6th. There was no sign of forced entry or outside attackers. The investigation began to narrow. According to police, the layout of the crime scene suggested movement between rooms, not a single point of attack. Some victims were found indoors, others outside. There were no clear signs of a struggle involving unknown intruders, and nothing appeared to have been stolen in any way that suggested robbery as a motive. Phones belonging to the victims were missing. That detail stood out. In family homes, phones are often left behind. Their absence suggested deliberate removal, not random violence. As detectives built a profile of the household, attention began to turn inward, to family members and people closely connected to the home. Police confirmed that 2 daughters were away at boarding school, having left earlier on January 5th. That narrowed the list of people who could account for the family's final hours. Investigators also began tracking phone activity linked to the missing devices. At the same time, they were tracking the movements of Lawrence Warunge. When detectives eventually found him, they noted that he did not attempt to flee or resist arrest. What happened next defined the entire case. According to DCI, Warunge did not remain silent. Instead, he agreed to speak, and then he confessed in detail. During questioning, he provided a detailed account of what he claimed had happened before, during, and after the killings. Detectives say the confession included information that had not been made public. More importantly, Warunge offered to physically lead police to places connected to the disposal of evidence. This marked as a turning point. Confessions can be disputed, but locations are harder to explain. Under the police escort, Warunge led detectives to the Jikaze IDP camp in Kiambu, where he pointed out a deep pit latrine. Inside, police say they recovered weapons and clothing consistent with the crime. He also led officers to an open field where he said other items, including mobile phones, had been destroyed by fire. For investigators, this recovery transformed the confession from a statement into what they believed was a corroborated evidence. The case against him appeared, at least at that stage, to be solidifying. But the story did not end there. Months later, after undergoing psychiatric evaluation and being declared fit to stand trial, Lawrence Warunge stood in court and recanted his confession, pleading not guilty to all 5 counts of murder. He claimed the statement had not been true. In April 2021, Lawrence Warunge was formally arraigned in the High Court and charged with 5 counts of murder corresponding to the deaths of Nicholas Njoroge Warunge, Anne Wanjiku, Christian Jenga, Maxwell Jenga, and James Kinyanjui Wamba. Each count carried the possibility of a life sentence or death penalty under Kenyan law. At this stage, Warunge pleaded not guilty to all charges. This plea marked a sharp break from his earlier cooperation with the police. Before trial could proceed, the court ordered a psychiatric evaluation to determine whether Warunge was mentally fit to stand trial. Medical reports presented to the court indicated that while Warunge had a history of substance abuse and episodes of psychosis, he was ultimately found fit to plead and participate in his defense. This finding was critical. It meant the trial could proceed, and that responsibility for his actions will be determined in court, not deferred on grounds of incompetence. The case moved forward. The confession itself became the central legal battleground. The prosecution relied heavily on the detailed nature of the confession, Warunge's ability to lead police to hidden evidence, and the alignment between his statements and physical findings. However, the defense challenged the circumstances under which the confession was made, whether Warunge's mental state affected its reliability, whether proper legal safeguards were followed during questioning. In Kenyan law, a confession must meet strict standards to be admissible. If found to be coerced, improperly recorded, or given while a suspect was mentally compromised, it can be excluded. This raised a core question for the court. Was the confession a reliable account or a legally flawed statement? As with many complex murder trials in Kenya, proceedings experienced delays, driven by court backlogs, procedural hearings, and legal motions. During this period, Warunge remained in custody. The family's surviving relatives largely stayed out of the public eye, and public updates became infrequent. For many observers, the absence of regular court developments added to the sense of uncertainty surrounding the case. Legally, the Warunge case stands as a study in contradiction, a confession that appeared detailed then withdrawn, evidence recovered then legally challenged, a suspect deemed mentally fit despite documented psychological struggles. And at the heart of it all is an unresolved tension between what investigators believe happened and what can be proven beyond reasonable doubt in court. The law demands certainty, but cases like this live in the space between what is said, what is proven, and what will never be undone. Cases like this don't end neatly. 5 people were killed in a place that should have been safe. What followed was a confession, a recantation, and a legal process shaped by unanswered questions. For the courts, the focus is evidence. For investigators, it's procedure. For the people left behind, it's loss. This case is a reminder that violence within families is often hidden in plain sight, and that warning signs like emotional distress, substance abuse, and isolation are easy to overlook until it's too late. If you or someone you know is struggling with severe emotional distress, paranoia, or thoughts of harming themselves or others, help is available right here in Kenya. Reach out to Befrienders Kenya Suicide Prevention Hotline 116, absolutely free. Kenya Red Cross Emergency Line 1199. National Police or Emergency Services at 999 or 112 or 911. Child Helpline Kenya at 116 for children and adolescents in distress. Reaching out early can save lives. And if you want to honor the victims in this case, do it by taking mental health seriously, by supporting families affected by violence, and by paying attention when something doesn't feel right. Because behind every case are real people, and their lives deserve to be remembered for more than how they ended. This was Crime Dopers. My name is Wanja. Thank you for listening.